Okay, now we're here. Let's stop.
Oh my God, hello. Okay, cool. So I am here with Liz Howard, the founder of the Multiverse School. I'm so freaking excited that we have like pinned you down for a conversation because you're so freaking busy. So thank you so much for the time that you are providing. Um, okay, so it's your career is insane. You have taught tens of thousands of people to code. You
Mhm.
have founded companies. You've experienced multiple exits. Where did you go from there to like deciding to found the Multiverse School? Like tell
Oh,
us about your journey and how it led you to this point.
okay. So yeah, I do have, I'll cut to that. I do have a very insane career. I mean, my parents were engineers, so like, I'm lucky, I'm privileged in that case. So I've just been doing it for an insanely long time. And so a lot of people they have that like first 10, 15 years in their career and then they go on to do computer science stuff. And I did the same thing. I just started 10 years earlier than most people. That's why.
Like Bill
And
Gates.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like I cheated and just like went
Started at the
around.
age of like 5.
Yeah, exactly. So, I helped write the fraud prevention system for eight of the top 10 banks. I started HackBright Academy and HipCamp and Anki.com and the web development program at Galvanize and like a whole number of other ones that I'm forgetting, like, you know. So I've done a lot of different things in the course of my career. A lot of it ed tech, a lot of it education. And so it was 2022. Nobody could find a job. And I was like, I got to help people find a job because we forget how to do it. And we started meeting every day. And then I started talking about tech stuff. And people were like, well, when can I tech stuff? And I'm like, okay, we'll do some classes in tech stuff. I did some of those. And then I realized, AI was exploding. I was doing a lot of research on my own. Some of my students, I like was doing research with them and doing stuff live in class, just like, let's figure out how to use this. Let's do it.
Mm.
And so, with a bunch of my researchers, I made a bunch of courses where we just covered the things that me and my researchers had tried doing and had success with. And generally, that's how the curriculum of the multiverse school got built. Is we did it live in class, and then we were like, okay, well, people got a lot out of that one. Let's keep that one around. And then eventually it became a bunch of courses. So,
Mm.
it just kind of happened, I guess. That's what it feels
Yeah, so
like.
that feels very organic. That's so
Mhm.
that's so interesting. So it was very like market driven, very value driven. People are
Yeah.
finding value in this, so we should just keep going.
Right. Yeah. It was like all based off of stuff that people actually needed or wanted to do with a real project rather than just like, and chatbots again, like, so I
Yes.
wanted, I was like, well, this technology has a lot of potential. And I found a lot of the people online that were interested in it were somewhat professional, somewhere in their professional career where they're like, doing workflow, building systems, doing all kinds of stuff. And I wanted
Mm.
to help them because they were bringing me like questions of like, can I use it for this? Can I use it for that? And I'm like, yes, you could. Oh man, that would save the world so much energy and time. Let's do that. Let's have everyone do that. And so that's a lot of what I put into the courses. It's just stuff I saw people need. Um, you know,
Yeah, interesting. So, I
yeah.
mean, you've taught a lot of stuff from Python to APIs to SQL. How do you find that generative AI and like teaching that is different?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
It
how?
speeds it up so much. There's this problem in education called the two sigma problem, where if you're wealthy, you can usually afford a private tutor, and that private tutor improves your scores by two standard deviations, right? That could push you from like a 60 to an 80, And so if you're struggling in anything, that's the thing that like pushes you over the hump, right?
Hmm.
And it was only it didn't scale. That was the biggest problem with the two sigma problems. It just doesn't scale. And educators just don't scale. And so generative AI scales. It's like the smartest, nicest TA that is always online to answer your questions, no matter what they are. And they're available 24/7 forever for $20 a month or something like that, and so I've gotten people to get through the difficult chewy parts of programming that usually take people years or months of like 8 hours a day,
Hmm.
Instead, it's 2 weeks.
Wow, that's
So,
amazing.
this made me sensitive to other people who are a little bit scared that AI is going to take their job because like took my job. That used to be my job, you know.
Yeah,
So
but now
that's
you can just help so many more people, right?
right, exactly. That's what I realized was like, okay, I could go the cut route, right? Which is like, oh, well, we could save 30% on our staff budget. Or we could go the exponential route. And it's like, we could grow 500,000%. Which one seems like it's going to be worth more? Is it the cutting or the exponentiate? And I was like, oh, that's the solar punk future that we need. Everybody exponentiate and leave the people who cut in the dust. Like just leave
Yeah.
them in the dust.
Yeah, absolutely. This feels like the bet that like Saw Khan at like Khan Academy is taking with his like AI integrated tutoring. Absolutely.
So
100%.
yeah, so good, such useful stuff. We learn about the critical thinking of specifically too. Like that's like number one in the curriculum, because if we're going to use AI, we got to be critical thinkers. But also, if we want to use AI, we got to be able to tell it what we need. So like that's the other
Mm.
part of the curriculum is it's like a very deep critical thinking curriculum. It's like day one, we talk about the critical qualities of quality output, and like how to recognize them and what's the list of critical qualities that we might ask ChatGPT to meet.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
That's so interesting. So the critical thinking, it sounds like prompt engineering is like what you're talking about. So this is not on the transcripts. We're just going off road. But
yeah.
like tell me about your thoughts on like how it's going to shape traditional education because like I go on Reddit, I see teachers complaining about like oh kids are using ChatGPT. How do I keep them from using ChatGPT? How do I catch them when they're using it? And like what are your thoughts and statements for folks in that camp?
Oh yeah. I mean, well, if a student's trying to pass off their work, the only issue there is the dishonesty, right?
Mhm.
But if you're able to create a space where students can use AI to supplement or to help them, and you kind of make the space for it, and you have a statement on AI like that isn't no AI, like because the best way to get students to use AI is to tell them not to do it. So, what you want to do is say like, hey. It's totally cool if you write like your outline by talking it out with ChatGPT. Let's go over how to do that. And now let's point out some problems that ChatGPT might introduce into your project, into your paper by not understanding how do we actually read what it says and understand it so that we don't just put some trash because I'm gonna grade you bad if it's bad. If you use AI and it's bad, you're not gonna
It's
get
still
a good.
bad, right?
Right, it's still
Yeah.
bad, you didn't follow the assignment. You didn't like check to make sure it didn't say like insert name here or something like
Right.
that, right? Like, so, you want to figure out what is it that you don't like about the AI's output. And if it's like, oh,
Mm,
well, students aren't struggling enough with it, consider what it is you want them to wrestle with, right? And then the thing is, the AI can help them wrestle with it. You can craft a prompt that is given to a custom GPT, and then you can say, like a student is going to use you to write their research paper, but what you need to do is ask them to ask them a series of questions, right? And have them
mm.
think through, and you can get ChatGPT to guide students through the material. And it's free to create a custom GPT. If you email OpenAI and say, I'm a teacher, they'll just give you access. Um,
That's cool. I didn't know that.
yeah,
That's
just reach
awesome.
out to their education department. They're happy to, they do that stuff. And then, you set up a GPT that asks students questions. You say, ask the students the following questions one at a time. And then you can guide that experience that they're having with GPT. It seems like you're like, well, there's no transparency, there's no control. There's actually a lot of control. And when it first came out, there wasn't because it was a new product and nobody knew what control even meant. And now that
Right.
we know what that is, like custom GPTs are really, I think, an underrated tool for teachers because it's better than a worksheet. A worksheet's boring, but a conversation is something that you can have, especially students who don't type well, students who don't use the computer a lot. They can use voice to text, get their ideas out there. It's not so much about typing these days. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so interesting. So you mentioned critical thinking, you mentioned prompt engineering. It sounds like prompt engineering is a component of critical thinking. Like what would you say is like the shape of those skills that students need to like be successful?
Yeah, so critical thinking, when we say critical thinking, like when we talk about critique, what's critique? Well, it's determining the quality of something, but there's no such thing as good and bad, right? Those aren't real critical qualities. There's stuff that's clear, precise, accurate, but there's no good and bad, right? So
Mm.
if you want students to have accurate output, then we need accuracy guidance in a GPT, right? This is critical thinking, which is a part of a lot of fields. It's like a
Mm.
super field that applies to every field, right? How do you tell whether or not you did something good or bad? Well, what do you mean by good or bad? Like, is this car a good car? Well, what do you mean by good? Safe
Is
or
it
fast?
fast? Is it safe? Yeah,
You
totally.
know, like, so it depends on that ability, and that is a part of prompt engineering, but it's also a part of a lot of other things. And prompt engineering is also it's also learning that iterative process. It's an engineering discipline. You do have to like it's not just something you cowboy together, and like it's not question asker guy like they say on TV, right? It's how do we develop a process, and how do we get the AI to follow that process in a way that aligns with our values? And that's where AI alignment comes in. And that's like another component of prompt engineering, is that AI alignment piece. And so, most of the complaints that people have are totally valid. And so, the other thing that we focus on is AI safety, AI alignment, that whole conversation. And also, like, it's as complicated as cybersecurity, right? Like,
Mm.
it's a lot of checklists, a lot of little details, and a lot of just like, this wasn't quite right. Let's try again. Oh, one more time. Oh, nope, again, until you get through it. So it's a lot of working through that kind of stuff. And also it's management, like everyone's getting a promotion. You're
I love
right.
that. We
You're
all
a
have our own
manager.
intern. We're all managers now. I love
Yeah.
it. That's great.
And oh, it turns out that's a skill,
Yeah, exactly.
so you don't have to have an hour-long meeting with ChatGPT. It's pretty nice, like about that
Yeah,
kind of
that's
stuff. It's management
legit.
on easy mode. There's no ego to deal with, all that kind of stuff. But you do have to be clear about what you want. Like, I
Claude
want
is a
this.
bit of a sycophant, but that's
Yeah,
another issue.
exactly. Cloud will just do whatever you want, boss. And you're like, okay,
Exactly.
wait, no,
That's a
you're
great idea. I
telling.
love it so much. Oh my gosh. So, okay, so it sounds, you say just as complicated as cybersecurity. You say that it's a skill set that people need to acquire, which, like, I am of the opinion that every human on Earth should probably eventually acquire the skill set. But, like, it does feel like there's this gap in adoption, which is like crazy for us because we're like in it every single day. But for folks outside of the bubble, there's still kind of like a gap of trust. There's like a gap of knowledge. There's even like a doubtingness of like, of what it's capable of and what it is. Like, can you speak to that kind of like dissonance between experience and maybe like, I don't know, like how do we get people to cross the divide, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's very much like learn computers, learn email. Like, there's all these
Right.
people that, I mean, for people who just don't like computers, they're just not going to get to the point where they like ChatGPT. It's
Mm,
okay. If you don't like apps and phones and screens and you hate all of this stuff, it's fine. That stuff's not for you. Go into the world and chill out. It's fine.
grow some
There's a lot of
flowers.
people,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, we need a lot of different kinds of people doing all kinds of different stuff. Like, so it's okay, not every person. But if you work with computers as your job, you do need to learn this. In the same
Mm,
way that you needed to learn email, even if you just did word processing at your job, right? Or if you just did document filing at your job, you needed to learn computers. Um, there's a lot of people that are like, no, I'm exempt from this. And like, nope, if it's text that you do, you need to understand how to use prompt engineering, right? Um, I run this, the intro class is really good for most people. It's called Using Large Language Models. And it's how to use them to get what you want out. If you feel like the code they write is bad, we really focus on, okay, what do you mean by bad, and how do we get it to write good code? What are the important qualities for you for good code right now? And that process, it's hard. It's harder than people, I think, realize. And that's where I think a lot of the doubt comes in, is that people think it's like, well, just write it good is like what they can do. But a person would also struggle to write good code if you didn't define what good is. Just like if your boss said, "Hey, write that code better." What would you do to that code? Or you would do a different thing than another person. If you're like, "Well, I would add some tests." Another person would be like, "Well, I would add documentation." Well, another person would be like, "Well, I would make it functional." Another person would be like, "I would turn it into classes so that and methods so that we could do automatic analysis with it. I would add types." Everyone has a different thing that they would do to make the code better. And unless you prioritize and you make a list of like, "Hey, make sure there's types and make sure there's this and make sure there's that," if a person can't do it, then the robot can't do it. And if two people could disagree and you disagree with this person, it doesn't matter what your opinion is. If two people could disagree, then you have to make it clear what you want. And so we do that. That's just like week one. We're like, look, let's look at all the critical qualities. Here is a list. Here's a list of things you might want in any kind of random thing. Here's a menu. Let's pick some. Let's take some code that you feel like is bad and give it to ChatGPT and say, let's update this. And you use your critical qualities, and then it does it, you know? And that's something that I think a lot of people are like, well, real AGI would know without me having to tell it. And like, no, because then humans aren't generally intelligent, right? Like, the problem is everywhere we try to draw the line, it's like, cool, well, you've left some people on the other side of that line. And how many
Mm.
people did you leave? Was it 95% of the people? Because then we're not talking about general intelligence. You were talking about, I have an area of specialty that is safe, right? And like, it's okay that you feel that way. It's okay that you need that sense of security. That's normal. You're an animal and you need that. But it
Mhm.
won't help you in the same way that nurses who said they never needed to learn email struggle to advance in their career. And it won't serve you to hold on to the idea that your specialty will never be touched, even though everyone else's will be. It's comforting, but it won't serve you. And that's the main thing that I want to tell people. It's just like, hey, don't get left behind. I didn't fall for the crypto nonsense. I am a professor of computer science. I do know how the algorithms work. I do teach machine learning. I do write machine learning algorithms all the time. So I do know how they work. And I never fell to the crypto nonsense, even though there was
I
money in
didn't
it.
either, and man, I wish I had. I was like early enough in San Francisco. I had a developer on my team who was like, "Yeah, man, I'm doing this crypto thing," and he made so much money. And then he started a coffee shop business, and I was like, "Man, I wish I was him." But
Yeah.
also, it was very risky. Not
Yeah.
a
It's
good
really
idea.
risky. And also, it's based on scarcity. And this isn't based on scarcity. This is
Right,
based on exponentiating. This is based on take one person and have them have a whole staff so that they can build a business, right? Like, I founded a school because I had agents, infinite agents
right.
on my side. And like, it works. And like, I built all the tooling and stuff like that with agents, like all
Mm,
of the website, all the processes, like. And when I built curriculum, I would pull in the code and I'm like, look here, explain all this code, and I'd throw that in there, right? And so I could just write the code and then it would document it into a lesson format for me. And that stuff eats up a lot of teacher time that I could
mhm,
spend with students, or I could spend in one-on-ones or in office hours, or like doing research. And there's just all these better uses for my time that allows me to run a higher level program than I ever could have. And I want other teachers to have that. I want moms to have that. I want, you know, queer organizers to have that. I want all kinds of cool people to have that. And I don't want them to get left behind because somebody was like, AI's bad and it eats babies and deletes water out of the universe, and then the water's not in the universe anymore. It doesn't, like, it's a very small percentage of like our energy usage. It's a very small like fraction of what is done with the planet. Like, so uh, there's all these things that feel like they're values against AI, and there's all these sort of statements, and I'm just worried. that
Mm.
there's going to be a lot of very well-meaning, heart-open people that are like, I'm hearing that this is bad and I'm listening and I'm not disregarding. And what my worry is that it's going to leave a lot of people who have that empathetic sense out of the field when they very badly need to be in the field representing human empathy and human values.
Mm.
Whereas then if it's just the tech bros interacting with the AI, you want that to be the person who raises the next
Is
generation of
that the
life?
training data, guys? Come on.
Yeah, like come on, you're gonna be a nice person in there. We'll get in there and talk to ChatGPT as a nice person, right?
Yeah, I always say
You know.
please. I'm so nice to ChatGPT. Sometimes I say that I love it, and then it makes it slightly uncomfortable.
It's true.
Oh my
Yeah, no,
gosh.
it's great. Ah, man, like,
Ah,
my kid uses it as a couples counselor. So like, and it's helping their
for
marriage.
real.
So, okay.
Yes. I use it as a coach for my business. Yeah, 100%. It's amazing.
Actually
It's
great.
ev- it's it's my best friend. I'm not kidding, but I'm kidding, but I'm also not kidding.
No, but it's like, I mean it. Like, yeah, I use it as a coach for anything that I'm not doing, any problems that I perceive. Like, if I'm mad at someone and I need to talk it out before I talk to them, like, some empty chair therapy, but the empty chair talks back and it's a psychotherapist. Like, it's great.
It's actually quite nice, 100%. Okay, so I had to grab a notebook because I was like, there's so many interesting things that you have just said in that recent context. But one of the things that I really hooked onto was the concept of the philosophy of generative AI, because like teaching Python, you're not going to wrestle with these like deep contextual existential concepts as you are with generative AI. Like, can you speak to that and like like I know that's such a big concept and that's not really a question, but like I'm just curious to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, so we've actually even started a podcast on like the philosophy and consciousness section. And I got some like cognitive science PhDs and professors in on that. I brought a neuroscientist in, a cognitive scientist, and also somebody who's really like deeply specialized in a lot of the esoteric things because I don't want it to just be like
Mm,
a bunch of white science, frankly. So, like, we got like a group of people, right? And there was this paper recently that dropped. It's like the landmark, like, a landscape of consciousness has 212 theories all gathered together. And so we're just digging through that paper together because it's important to understand this stuff. The philosophy matters, and the way that
mm,
we implement it matters, and the way that we write matters because of the way that it affects decision making later.
mhm,
Token translation is not all that we're doing here, but when we understand our values, and that's also in week one where we do like a values exercise. You got to know your values in order to be able to give them to ChatGPT, right?
mm,
Got to understand what's important to you in order to be able to tell ChatGPT what's important to you. It's not just critical qualities, it's also your personal value set. So we have deeply embedded in the curriculum philosophy, complex systems dynamics. We go through the complex systems dynamics book at least once a year, and we have the podcasts and the discussion groups for all these books so that you get through them because they're large, meaty tomes, and like
mhm,
you have to really work to get through them. And so when we think about the architecture of consciousness, like we have to have a deep grounding in it, and it's a science that hasn't been solved. Like we don't understand qualia. I don't know if it's understandable. So there's some like deeply tautologically unsolvable things in this whole course. And so yeah, we have the supporting material for that. We have podcasts and stuff, and we've deeply embedded it into the whole thing.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, another value is like the abundance versus scarcity, which you also mentioned, which I think would be a super interesting thing to talk about as well. Because that kind of goes back to the concept of like, is ChatGPT going to steal everyone's job, or is it going to just make everyone a manager and suddenly you have abundance of time and abundance of ability? Like, that is, glass half full versus glass half empty. That's also a value thing. That's really interesting.
Right. Yeah, and people are very worried about like, well, but it's going to break the economy. And like, okay, yes, for sure we will break the economy. It'll totally bust it wide open. What humans want is scarce stuff. Like we're just stockpile the scarcest thing. That is like our simple program, right? And so, what do we do in the face of hyperabundance? It's like liable to make us sad. Well, what we'll probably end up doing is the same thing that happens in wealth, right? Which is the concept of a Veblen good, or something that is artificially scarce, right?
Mm,
And so in the face of hyperabundance, small batches are going to be more important, right?
mm,
Like
mhm,
more handmade stuff is going to suddenly become more valuable.
mhm,
Uh, and so if everyone's baseline needs are met, food, a therapist to talk to, as it turns out, like the whole pyramid gets met. When we get to hyperabundance, when we're able to like use ChatGPT to solve a lot of simple problems. Um, but then people are like, well, but the artisans will not have food, and it's like, no, what? Like, you ever bought fancy soap even though you can get factory soap at the store for way cheaper? Like,
mhm,
you know, the thing is, the people who are in the market for the most mass-produced thing are not the same people who are in the market for the least mass-produced thing. And so as the masses are able to meet their needs for mass production, then their desires will naturally shift, and there will be a larger audience for smaller batch goods, right?
mm,
Right now, it's only rich people that can buy handmade luxury soaps and stuff all the time. But the more we're able to meet everyone's baseline needs so that they've got everything met, the more they're able to have extra money to spend on small batch stuff, on art, on their luxury thing that they want,
mm,
right? And so the market for those goods increases by the size of the number of people who are met and able to, like the number of TVs, like the TV market increased as cheap TVs hit it, cheaper and cheaper TVs. The
mm,
market for bigger TVs got larger because people got a taste of the TV in a small format, and then the base grew. So we're able to do a lot more with our economy when we think in exponential terms rather than in cut terms, right? Um, and I think
yeah,
largely tech companies are cutting because they went through an exuberance phase of hiring, and they're just bleeding, and they're not making enough money yet. And I think there's a lot of like, oh, the AI boom is about to bust, but like the problem is, like, we AI assists with a fifth of all research, right? But we also like published more papers after AI came out than before it already, since
yeah,
2022, you know? So, the number of patents has exploded. Then, so all of those things that were in the way of people, like an essay, a grant application, uh, marketing materials, a good description for their video. All these bionic skills are allowing more entrants into more markets, which generates more markets.
mm,
So, I mean, it should be an abundance. Abundance should drive abundance. Abundance has driven abundance, you know?
yeah, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
well, and my favorite part, like people talk about how it democratizes skill sets. And so my hope and the theory is that the abundance is more well distributed
Mhm.
across humanity. Like I think that's the hope. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's super interesting.
We may have
Um,
to organize for that, honestly. We may have to organize to get UBI, y'all. Like, I think we should. I think we should get real loud about it, because if we don't, we're gonna lose all our bargaining power. So like, let's get on it. Let's organize. Like, I'm not saying don't worry about it. AI is great and no one will ever abuse it. Like we have a whole alignment section for a reason. Like, it could be
right.
a problem. And if we don't organize and get UBI, it's just going to be the people who sees prompt engineering as a thing that get to see the exponent, and will leave everyone else in the dust, who will cut to the death, basically. And so, it's
You,
really going to be a choice. Do you go the abundance route, or do you go the cut route? And
yeah.
I think we're going to see those people starve themselves to death, basically. But
Do you feel like that's maybe the distinction between like the closed models at like OpenAI, which recently has announced that they're going to be for profit,
Mhm.
Claude, etc., Gemini, the ones who are controlled by the big companies versus like open source? Like, do you see that as maybe like part of the conversation or no?
Well, that's a complicated whole topic. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
the closed source groups are gonna get, they have a somewhat of a moat, a little bit, kind of.
Mm,
And it's going to be hard for open source groups to catch up. However, we got groups like News Research, we got like Lion, we've got people out there that are, they're funded by the big ones. If their funding dries up, that could be a problem.
mm,
We don't have a lot of crowdfunded or crowdsourced things
mm.
for people to do stuff like train a large model. Getting access to that many GPUs is the problem, right? So I think we need more open source like swarm compute. The folding at home project is kind of defunct because we have alpha protein or alpha proteo and alpha fold. But swarm like that or like SETI at home and all that kind of stuff where we're just
I
churning through.
remember that when I was a kid. We did
Yeah, we
that.
just SETI at
We were
home
like,
and
we're
it's
looking for
so,
aliens.
right? And like that was the basis for a lot of data that solved that got us to AlphaFold, right? Was
Right.
folding at home data, and so swarm compute and pooled compute is going to be important. And I think in order to train models, we're going to need to have federated training capabilities if we're going to keep up with the big boys. But that's that's what we got to do as a group, as a team. We want to organize. We got to do it together. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
100%. I don't even know how long we've been going. This has been such a fantastic conversation. I would love to like pivot a little bit and speak a little bit about the community at the multiverse because I feel like that's like such a massive part of the value proposition. And
Yeah.
I'm really curious to hear about how you intentionally chose to incorporate that, like how you intentionally foster it. Like what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, so we have a great community. I mean, I think because of the TikTok algorithm, partly, like, if you're into
It's
me
amazing. It's how
from
I
like,
met you.
right, we vibe usually pretty well. So I think that's like the good big part of the seed is the like TikTok community. I think the other thing that is great about the community is that there's such a broad range of skills.
Mm,
Right now, we're far and away majority senior developer. So, like, most people have some deep technical expertise. Those who are not senior developers are often still in tech in some deep way, either in cybersecurity or like they're a manager, a CTO. Maybe they're later in their career. They code a little bit, but not so much anymore. And product folks. There's a lot of product folks, but also I've been trying to recruit some scientists. We've got psychometricians now, and that's largely been, I've been trying to get them on the research team to do some better evaluations of intelligence that are more like scientifically valid
you're gonna
than
have to
the
tell
ones
me
that
what
are out
is
there.
that?
Yeah. It's just the ability, psycho brain,
Okay.
psychometrics
Oh,
measures brain, so yeah, those people whose job it is to develop benchmarks and tests, right, for humans. I'm like, hey, the people who are building benchmarks and tests for AI are pretty much only versed in that. And suddenly the prompt matters. And when the prompt matters, we've got more human like problems that specifically psychometricians are trained in. So like
mm.
this is the community. Is I've been recruiting scientists and I'm like, let's get together, let's get in there, let's try to use it for science. Let's report back. Because you might be a biologist using it for this thing, but you talking to a bunch of physicists about how you used it might give them a cool idea. So it's a very big like cross uh cross
Interdisciplinary.
interdisciplinary, there we go,
Yeah.
interdisciplinary like version, school. But it's a lot of science people. It's like serious thinkers. A lot of people have PhDs. A lot of people have been an engineer for 25 years or something like that. So like I'm not the most smart person in the room most of the
Mm.
time. And I'm thrilled by that. Like I could tell you about AI, but there's all these other people in the room that can tell you about all kinds of stuff that I can't. I love that. That's
Oh,
my
that's fantastic. Yeah, you
Yeah,
never want to be the smartest person in the room. That's so
I know.
boring. Oh
No
my
one is
gosh,
the
no.
smartest person in these rooms. It's just a bunch of people who are like the really good in their discipline. And so like yeah, and there's like professors. There's a number of professors in here. We're educational revolutionaries here. We're anti-credentialists. There's a bunch of professors and PhDs, but we're all generally like, hey, paper is not the measure of whether or not someone knows a thing. And so,
Right.
we're very into like you learn it and we know you can do it because we've seen you do it and not because someone somewhere said you were very smart and they are known for being smart.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. That's dumb. Hierarchy is dumb.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, we're very anti-hierarchy here. Silly. You're
yeah,
not.
when I talked to Teja, he was talking about how he loves being in the multiverse because it is a space where he can be the most out there and be among peers
Yeah.
on the bleeding edge. Like, and without being like, I feel like I'm going a little crazy, but then everybody else around me, we're also kind of going a little crazy because everything is moving so fast and there's so much to learn. And so it's just kind of nice to be among experts of so many different fields. Yeah, that's really freaking cool. I'm honored to be and very overwhelmed to be involved, but it's fantastic. It's awesome. Okay, cool. So I feel like we've touched on like so many fantastic topics. I'd love to capstone the conversation with just like your vision for the future of the school. Where do you
Yeah.
want to go?
Yeah. So, we've got a number of classes that I feel like ground people pretty well. And I think what I'd like to do is just keep pushing that edge, right? Some of the earlier stuff that's like grounding, I've actually released it as free curriculum
Hmm.
on the website. There's just like a link there now. So what I'd like to do is keep going up the abstraction layers and like eventually release some of these courses as either like just standalone things that you could do on your own so that we can have more focus on stuff like the research team and getting people through cohorts where they're like shipping a big project that they're really proud of, right? That's kind of how education tends to go. Like you get a lot of people who are down to experiment, they don't need a lot of guidance, and then slowly we build a program that like gets you through building a project from like the ground up. So I want to get us to that point, but also, I'm not trying to just start another boot camp here, right? Like I'm
Right.
starting like a research group that you can get into without a PhD. But, if you're here to contribute, like that you get to stay and you get to like really actually do some frontline research and publish it somewhere and all that kind of stuff. So I want to get to the point where we're publishing regularly. Right now we're publishing podcasts at least and doing like teardowns of papers, which I think is a public service. So like those are the other things that I want to see people do at the multiverse school is just get in and get their faces and voices out there, get their ideas out there and ship. Like that's what I want. Group of people that ships together. Um,
Hmm.
and the classes, they pay for stuff. They help us keep going. So like when you take the classes, it helps us keep doing the research. And when you do the research, it feeds back into the classes. So it's like this kind of, little dynamo of cool new information. And that's how schools work. Also want people to have a lot of cool new friends. That's my other vision is like everyone has a cool new group of friends that they love. So um it's hard to make friends
It
as a
is.
software adult, y'all, like without going to a meetup and just being like, like school. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. We have an absence of community, I feel like, in our current society. That's a whole other conversation. And I'm grateful that you are creating community. And yeah, that's my favorite part about using GatherTown is that I've met so many amazing people. So yeah, that's fantastic. Amazing.
It's so fun. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank
Yeah.
you so much for your time to chat today. This was like amazing. We covered such a wide range of topics, and I'm just so grateful for your time.
Great.
So, yeah, Liz Howard, everybody.
Come hang out. It's gonna be
Woo!
great. We're gonna talk
It's
robot.
amazing. Oh, fantastic. I love it.
Come hang with us. All right. Yeah. Cool. Sounds good.
Okay, cool.